Developmental psychology focuses on the changes in behavior and abilities that occur as development proceeds, and developmental researchers examine both what the changes are and why they occur. And one of the important theories of development is cognitive developmental approach by Piaget. And cognition refers to knowing, and the central idea underlying these theories is children's behavior reflects the structure or organization of their knowledge. And according to Piaget, the mind is simply a passive receiver of information but an active processor of experience. And Piaget came to believe that biological activities were the result of adaptation to physical environment and results in the organization of the mind, and the organized patterns of behavior and perception are called schemata. Infants' schemata are usually action-oriented, while adult schemata are abstracted, and the process that are responsible for these adaptation are called as assimilation and accommodation. And assimilation refers to the process of using the same structure in more than one way. For example, an infant sucks a nipple, then its hands, and so on. And if you talk about accommodation, it refers to the process of changing one's action to fit in a new situation. And it is a process of modifying an action to fit to a new situation. And here Piaget has given 4 stages to explain about this cognitive theory. The first stage, which he calls it to be sensory motor stage, which moves from birth to 2 years, and the second stage is known as pre-operational thought, which moves from 2 to 7 years. The third one is known as concrete operational thought, which moves from 7 to 12, and the formal operational thought begins after 12. And when we talk about the sensory motor stage, what is the sensory motor stage? And this, as I said, it is seen from birth to 2 years of age. During the first weeks of life, the babies have not yet discovered the repetitions of events, and object permanence is not seen during this time. The baby's first schemata are references which are expanded and modified by learning and experience. And this sensory motor stage itself is divided into 6 sub-stages. One is reflex action, the other one is primary circular reaction, the other one is secondary circular reaction. The next one is coordination of secondary schemas, the fifth one being tertiary circular reaction, and the last one being invention of new means through mental combination. If we talk about reflex action, we see that the baby tend to concentrate more of his activities in sucking, and the object permanence is does not emerge during this time. And when we go for primary circular reaction, we do find the baby is more engaged in its own activities, and the term primary means he repeats many of the activities in his own body itself, and he loves to see his own body movements, and this is why we use the term primary circular reaction. And from here we move on to secondary circular reaction, where the child observes many of the activities in others rather than in his own body. And from here, if we move on to coordination of secondary schemas, we do find the child at this sub-stage uses many of the schemas with the environment, and object permanence emerges, which is known as contextually bound object permanence. And here the Piaget uses the term A but not B error, which means the baby is able to recognize the objects that have been put at the first hiding place rather than the object that have been put at the second hiding place. So this is what he calls it to be A but not B dash error. From here, if we move on to the next one, which is tertiary circular reactions, here we do find the parents are much excited to watch their children, and we do find the child uses many of its newly acquired knowledge, and the child readily climbs the chair, throws the things from the chair to find out what is the reaction of a parents. And from here, if we move on to the last sub-stage of sensory motor, which is invention of new means through mental combination. By the end of the last substage, we do find the language acquisition begins. He uses many of the symbols. By the last substage, the object permanence emerges. So this is the end of sensory motor stage. From here, if we move on to pre-operational thought, here we do find there is a little bit of advancement in the cognitive development of a child, and here the child uses many of the symbols. Symbolic play is seen and language is seen. Earlier thought was limited to the child's immediate environment, and though there is lots of changes which we see during the second stage, but again this stage its own limitation. The first limitation is centering. We do find the child concentrates on only one thing rather than concentrating on both height and weight. And if you go for the other thing which we call it to be egocentric, the child is more egocentric during this stage, where he does not come to understand that there are other points of view, and he just comes to understand. He's very much self-centered during this time, and he has problem with regard to states and transformations. So he either concentrates on the states rather than concentrating on the transformations. And if you go for the other thing, which is the non-reversibility of nature, the child does not come to understand that water can be brought back to glass A once again from glass B. This the child does not come to understand during pre-operational thought. And during this time itself, though he has lots of difficulties, he tries to overcome these difficulties as he moves on to the concrete operational thought, where we do find the child is less egocentric, decentration occurs, he is able to see the states and transformation, reversibility of nature, and he is also able to solve conservation problems. Conservation means the amount of something remains the same regardless of its changes in its size or shape. This the child comes to understand only during this concrete operational thought. And earlier he would have been using the trial and error method, and during this concrete operational thought he readily tries to solve his problem through his own insight method. So instead of placing the sticks in an order from the larger to the smaller, he mentally tries to put it, and then he places the sticks in an order. So this kinds of activities are seen during this concrete operational thought. So during this concrete operational thought, many of the conservation problems the child is able to solve. One is conservation of number, conservation of area, conservation of length, conservation of space. These types of conservations the child is able to solve early during this concrete operational thought. And though the concrete operational thought is attained at this 7 years of age, there are some children who will be attaining this stage earlier, and there are some children who will be attaining this late. So there are cross-cultural differences regarding this Piaget's cognitive stages. Even the cross-cultural variations does influence to us what stage does this child enters, at what age does the child enters into these stages. And at this time itself, social cognition develops. And as I said, the child being less egocentric, the term which is given for this is social cognition. Here the child comes to understand that there are other points of view. And here itself we do find children's humor also develops. They are notorious for telling bad jokes. So these types of behaviors are also seen during this concrete operational thought. And from here this period ends by the age of 12 years. And as I said, there is no hard and fast rule saying that this have to be ended by 12 years. And after this concrete operational thought, a child moves on to the formal operational thought, which usually we see that the adolescents attain this formal operational thought. And during this formal operational thought, a person can think flexibly enough to consider abstract universals such as freedom and justice, and grasp their intrinsic qualities. And by the age of 15 or so, most individuals understand abstract characteristics such as congruence and mass. And according to Piaget, there are some individuals who do attain this formal operational thought earlier. There are some individuals who attain it very late. So by the end, whatever stages Piaget gave, it ended by adolescence. So after this, he hasn't given any stages of cognitive theory. So here, when you talk about Piaget's theory, what are the things which we saw? Let's go through the summary of this cognitive development theory. The first thing which we saw was the definition of developmental psychology, followed with what was adaptation. And to get adapted, we had two processes. One was assimilation, the other one was accommodation. And every individual, whether it's a child or a grown-up adults, we tend to use this assimilation and accommodation throughout our life. These are the two important complementary processes which we use in our day-to-day life. And from here we went on to the stages of Piaget's theory, where I said we have four theories, one being sensory motor theory, the other one being after pre-operational we have concrete, and then formal operational thought. Under sensory motor itself, I said we have 6 sub-stages, where I said the first one was being reflex action. The second one, as I said, it to be primary circular reaction, and I said the child tends to concentrate more upon his own body movements rather than upon any other thing. And from here we went on to secondary circular reaction, concentration on others' activities rather than on one's own. And here from secondary circular reaction we went on to coordination of secondary schemas. And here itself I said though object permanence emerges but it is not completely developed, if a particular object is being partially hidden, a child tries to search for that particular object, because the ability to move around allows him to go and search for an object that have been hidden. And here itself I also use the term A but not B error, which means the subject is able, or the children are able to find out the first hiding place rather than the second hiding place. Now take for example, you just take a particular thing in your hands and just close it before a child. Surely we do find the child tries to open your fingers to find out where you have hidden. Now from the first hiding place, if you move on to the second hiding place, the children is not able to go for the second hiding place. So this is, Piaget uses the term A but not B dash error. So this type of behavior is seen in the sensory motor stage. From here we went on to the pre-operational thought, where I said the child is able to use lots of symbols, symbolic play is seen, make-believe play is seen, functional play is seen. Though it has its own changes, but this period also had its own limitations, like centering, states and transformation, non-reversibility. These are the limitations which we see in the pre-operational thought. From here we went on to concrete operational thought, where I said a much more of changes are seen in the concrete operational thought. And I said the child is less egocentric, is able to see the states and transformations simultaneously, the reversibility of nature. These types of changes are seen in the concrete operational thought. And from there we went on to the formal operational thought, where I said the child is able to consider many abstracts universal, such as freedom and justice. So by the end of this formal operational thought, what Piaget gave the theory ends by this formal operational thought.